from a labor perspective. Well, there we go. Well, we can try. The wind is fighting us.
Hi everyone, Alex at Corumdale Farm. We are a year 3 Oklahoma flower farm that sells retail market bouquets from our roadside stand. It is early March, which in Oklahoma zone 7A is early spring. The temperatures are lovely. It's a little chilly today, but it's sunny and it's time to finally do another field tour. It feels like it's been forever. We did some great videos, I think, over the winter. Some wonderful interviews that we had and some like topical discussions, but I'm excited to be outside and giving you real flowers, plants, farming updates. And so we're starting in our tunnel. We have a Farmer's Friend caterpillar tunnel, and inside we have planted ranunculus, anemones, and snapdragons. The ranunculus and anemones were planted in November. We have a video about that if you'd like to see what we grow, the varieties, how I planted. But here is the update. It is like buds galore in here. Some of them are more farther along. So like this guy, we can actually finally see some color, which is exciting. That'll be the first one I think I harvest. But then in this same patch, there are just buds everywhere. Whenever Eric and I come into the tunnel, we've been noticing it seems like the bud amount doubles each time we come in here to check, which is really exciting. This is an Almondine variety here we're showing you, but we have Almondine and Elegance, bunch of different colors. You show an orange one here, which is fun. The one's starting to color up. So we also have anemones blooming. The first anemone bud was, I think, like February 2nd, which is our anniversary. I think that's why I remember the date. They start out short, but eventually they get taller and taller as you cut. So you can see like this pink one, for example, is more than a foot long stem, which is great for our wrap. So the height that they're blooming at right now is exactly what I want. But we haven't officially opened the farm stand. So I've been cutting these as they have been ready, and then I've been selling them on our Facebook page. Like, I have 6 anemone wraps available, prepay, that sort of thing. It's not ideal because it's inefficient, but we're learning every year with our timing. And so I think next year we're just gonna plant these a little bit later so they start hitting their peak height when we're opening the stand in mid to late March. So the varieties we have here in the tunnel for anemones are Jerusalem, blue, and pink. They're the ones that are giving us the tallest stems right now. We also have Marron pink, which is a deeper saturated pink that Eric especially likes, but so far they're not giving me quite as many stems and as tall. It might just be because they're a little slower and they'll catch up. But so far, Jerusalem series is winning. I did do a second succession because Leo Burby was having a sale, couldn't resist, bought some more corms. And that's what this section is here. That's why it looks so much smaller. But these guys have started to push their first dorky short buds. And so I think the timing will be great for these because they'll get cranking here in probably 2 or 3 weeks, which is when I can use them most. So I'm excited about the anemones. The anemones were 100% win this year for us. They grew beautiful. I love them. Our customers love them. I just need to dial in the timing a bit better next year. So this is our snapdragon section. I have 2 varieties here. I have Costa and Madam Butterfly. This I thought was going to be a complete disaster, if I'm being honest with you. We had plugs delivered like January 4th-ish, which was maybe 3 or 4 days before our huge like Arctic blast came. And so I was stuck with 2 bad options. My options were I just get them planted in the ground. We double row cover them in the tunnel like we do the other stuff. where, you know, we risk problems that way. Or because the Arctic blast was going to last at least like 10 days, I keep them in their trays inside. And that's bad because they're not sent in plug trays that give them a lot of root growth room. So they were going to get root bound. Not a great choice. So I went with the plant out. And we'll have a picture on the screen because I took so many pictures and sent to my friend Allison, who we interviewed last week, of just like weeping and gnashing of teeth at what I thought was killing 3 plug trays of snapdragons. But they rebounded and they look incredible. Honestly, the Costas look better and taller than my field snapdragons, which I guess isn't surprising because obviously tunnel conditions are better than field. But my goodness, I thought this was going to be the most expensively empty row here in the tunnel, but we've rebounded. I would say maybe 30% loss, maybe a little bit less. But when I was looking at like 80% loss initially, this feels really, really good. Always takes time, at least 1 or 2 seasons, to really dial in what your favorite varieties are, whether it's color or type. And so this year is going to be particularly interesting with ranunculus because we grew, like I said, Almondine and elegance, but I chose a bunch of different colors. I have probably 8 or 9 colors here, and it's very interesting to watch how they are growing differently, how the bud size looks different, and just see who puts out the most stems. The stressful thing is we already have to order our ranunculus pretty soon for next season. So I'm hoping by the end of March, I've picked like, okay, these are the best performers. These are our favorites. Let's order those again in higher quantities. But one thing that's interesting when I talk about observing, this little small section here is Almondine Black. I didn't want to grow this variety, I'll be honest, but it was super popular with my customers. Got to give them what they want. But it's interesting to note their growth habits. So they're putting out, just if you can see on camera, I mean, there's more than 100 buds that I'm looking at here, but the foliage is distinctly smaller and the buds are smaller. And so it's going to be interesting to see this variety perform. I'm not going to be super upset if it doesn't do that well and it gets the cut, but maybe it ends up being a top performer. I don't know. We'll see. But lots of buds on Almondine Black. This variety is Elegans Viola, which is the Italian version of like the black ranunculus, and its growth habit is very different from the Almondine. So lots of interesting things to note. We are planning to do a end of spring recap of everything that went well, everything that we learned, could have done better, things that we're going to improve next year. So I'm taking all these notes and we'll go over them probably in May once our spring flower season is over. In the 3rd row of our tunnel, which currently has silage strips on it because we definitely had some weed growth because they're loving the conditions in the tunnel, trying to kill back some of those weeds. And then in the coming weeks, we're going to be prepping this row because this is where our Lisianthus is going to go. We order plugs. The plugs are delivering in about 3 weeks. And so that's our timeline for getting this cleared out. We are going to plant the Lizzies into landscape fabric because the weed pressure is just going to get too high with them blooming in July. And I don't want to spend active harvest and selling season weeding in here. So we'll burn some fabric and the Lizzies are going to go in our 3rd row. And I'm excited to see tunnel Lizzies because they're supposed to get so much taller than our field Lizzies. And I loved our field Lizzies last year. So I'm excited. Behind me is our peony field. The peony field that almost killed Eric was really hard to put in. It's about 435 peonies behind me. Lots of different varieties. We have a video on our peonies if you want to see the varieties we chose and why. But the exciting thing is because it was so hard to plant these, I mean, we bought like 5-7 eyes, so the roots were monster, which is a wonderful problem to have, but it was super high labor. But the fun thing is they're all starting to sprout and see them come up and get really excited. No, we're not going to be able to harvest on them this year, but it just starts the clock. It starts the timeline. We do have a section that's clearly in a low point that gets way wetter, and some of those are struggling to come up. If they end up not making it, that's just going to be clear that we can't plant in those holes, and so we'll just cover them with landscape fabric strips, and we'll just have some gaps. But you know, you learn every year with your property, high spots, low spots, how things drain, and you make adjustments. And so that's probably going to happen for a section of ours. But like I said, we bought some monster, you come right here, honey, and I'll go behind it. We bought some monster-eyed roots from awnings particularly. So you can see here, for example, on this one, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 foliage stems coming up, which is clearly because of the root that we planted, which just means we're that much, you know, you spend more to get a 5-7 but it means that we're that much closer to being able to harvest on them in a couple years. So I love just seeing all of this fresh new growth pop up. Yeah, that one's huge. I wanted to look at what variety is. Oh, this is Duchess. This is a big white double peony. Yeah, this one's like not as many stems, but it's super thick. Yeah. So, and like this one, look, there's already a bud. Now we're in our big annual field, which is on the north side of our property, which is right by our flower stand. So this is the field that our customers can see the most. We have more than half of it silage tarped because we're not ready to plant it yet. That will get summer annuals, but we have 3 rows of spring flowers. So here to my left, we have our overwintered snapdragons. This is Madam Butterfly and Chantilly varieties. They definitely look different from the tunnel, which I mentioned, but it makes sense. They had to survive way harsher conditions than the babied tunnel ones, but I think they look pretty good. I've pinched half of them so we get a bit of a stagger. I'll have some taller, bigger blossom stems, and then I'll get ones that are branching and give me some more smaller ones. That's also a way to succession plant within your planting, because I planted these all at the same time. But by pinching half of them, I kind of set that half back a little bit and gives me a little more of a stagger instead of like 60 feet of snapdragons blooming at the same time. That's not particularly ideal. But on this side also, we have Bupleurum and we have Larkspur. Bupleurum, we didn't really cover this road that much in the winter. We had some loss, but it's clear that not everything got killed down to the roots. And so if it did, you know, we did pick off, you know, some top growth that died, but you can see that the roots are pushing. So it's almost like a succession, an undesired succession plant within the plant. But this is Bupleurum. It should bloom in April and May for us. And then we also have our Larkspur, which is looking really fluffy and wonderful. Same thing happened with the Larkspur. We had a little bit of dieback, but it's pushed new growth from the roots. And then some of the Larkspur that didn't get any stress is super big and fluffy, and hopefully gives us lots of wonderful May stems for our May bouquets. This is our tulip bed. Again, we did a tulip planting video. The tulips are a little bit of a not excellent this year. We knew we were taking a little bit of a risk with the compost we decided to use. Turns out that was a fairly big risk, and we won't be doing it again. So while the tulips are not, you know, dead, they're not terrible, they're not quite at the best performance I know these bulbs can give us, both in stem length and in the quality and size of the bulb. We're still harvesting beautiful tulips. I harvested some, brought them in the house, I watched them matured. They look beautiful. They're just not the highest standard that we're hoping for. So it's a big lesson learned. It's good to learn these lessons in farming. It's hard because you do have to wait a full year to correct your problem. But nonetheless, we will have tulips, and especially because the ranunculus is looking particularly beautiful, I think our butt is going to be saved a little bit from a stem volume count with having the ranunculus doing so well. But farming can be hard sometimes, and you learn rough lessons. Like I mentioned, we will do a spring recap video sometime in May, and I think at that point we'll go into greater detail of what exactly we think the problem was, so maybe you can avoid it or something to think about when you're deciding your tulip planting method. But a thing that I thought was kind of funny to see how it turned out is, if you remember in the tulip planting video, I organized the varieties from earliest blooming to latest blooming, thinking like I wanted to have the latest bloomers going closest to the farm stand so they didn't like see the mess, so to speak. But if you look at the growth habit, it's so clear that none of that mattered, because some of our biggest foliage is at the like later end variety, and these guys are supposed to be early, and they're just barely, some of them, pushing buds. So clearly in Oklahoma, the early, mid, late doesn't exactly pan out. So on the other side of, so that was the east side, northeast side. This is all for sunflowers this year. We did that in the past. We made our rows a little longer for this year so we could have more sunflowers. And we've already started direct sowing them. I know that's crazy. It's early March. Most of you grow in much colder environments. But one, we wanted to gamble a bit, because for us in Oklahoma, because of how warm we get, Mother's Day is actually really hard to have a lot of flowers, because by Mother's Day, it's going to be like 85. So our ranunculus are going to be petering out. Our tulips will for sure be done. And I'm going to have like snapdragons and maybe early larkspur. And so I needed to gamble for a bulkier focal flower until our peony field is at maturity, which it's not this year. So we are gambling. And we direct sowed our first row last Saturday of sunflowers. And Eric, after this video is filmed, is going to sow our second row. We have germination, and we also have the ability with low tunnels to cover them in the next couple weeks if we get to freezing. Currently, there's no freeze on the extended forecast, and we probably won't get a deep, hard freeze again. So I feel somewhat optimistic that this could work. If it doesn't, it doesn't, and we'll keep just succession planting, and we'll have our typical sunflowers starting in like third week of May. End of May is normal for us. We're just trying to gamble with that like 1 or 2 weeks earlier to hit Mother's Day. But we were just out here, and we noticed that last Saturday's sunflowers are starting to germinate. So you can see, you know, some of them have fully unfurled. Some of them are at that goosenecking phase where they're just popping up. Annoyingly, some of them are getting lopped, which is either going to be like a pill bug in our soil, because we have lots of them, or a little mouse is helping himself. So this field might be a little spottier than is ideal, but if I have sunflowers for Mother's Day at any quantity, that will feel like a win. It is interesting. This was sunflowers last year, and so clearly some sunflowers dropped and overwintered and have started to germinate. And so if you're looking at nature's timing, they're germinating on their own. So we have at least a bit of a chance to do it ourselves with our cedar. But yeah, this is clearly a gamble with the temperatures. Sometimes you just have to kind of do that to push the margins for things, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Well, why aren't you using the transplant method?
The reason we're not, so I mean, to minimize chance of like frost damage, the better thing to do would be to start them inside and then transplant them out, because transplants are a little bit more hardy with the temperatures than direct sown, because of the soil temperature and the damage they can get when they're young. Our issue comes down to, if you follow our channel at all, we want to be profitable with high profit margins. And so whenever you're doing things, you have to ask yourself, like, what does it cost? And so to do this row, I need to use all 10 trays of our 72 count trays, and I need to buy soil for that, the time to sow the 10 trays, to water them and take care of them every single day. That all has cost to it. And then also with the timing, I need those same trays to start our summer annuals here in a couple weeks. And so that like timing dance becomes really challenging. And I'm not going to go out and buy more trays and spend money on more trays for 2 weeks of snapdragon sowing when I'm not going to use those trays again the rest of the year. The cost just really starts to add up. And so I feel like it's better to try this gamble on these 2 rows than spend all that extra time and money to start them inside. But we'll see. We'll see if it works out. I mean, if Mr. Mouse is a big problem. We're up here in our flower drive-through. The past year, it was just grass that people were driving on. We were trying to observe what's the natural path of the cars. Is the flower stand going to work? Is this what we want to do? And it's obviously a resounding yes. And so we decided to spend money this year on graveling it because that'll make the drive much smoother for the customers in their car. We got like a crusher run of gravel, so that'll be nicer on the cars, less bumps. And then it'll mean that especially in the spring, there's less mud and ruts with all of the traffic we anticipate getting. But here is our sweet little flower stand from the past couple years. We are in the process of probably expanding that so that we can fit more flowers into one area and accommodate more customers and more volume, because that's our goal this year in year 3, to keep expanding. But right now the gravel drive is in. We've got some weeding to do and probably some spraying maintenance, but it's just those early tasks getting ready to open the stand. And depending on what the tulips do, we're looking at probably the 3rd week of March or potentially just Easter being opening day for the farm. Because our property is more boutique size in the way we've laid out the field, we don't have a ton of open space for parking. And so we really need to maximize how many cars we can fit on our property and off the main road during their purchasing time. And so one of the changes we're making is the flower stand is going to be at the end of the driveway here, where you can see the gravel pad got a lot bigger. So the stand's going to be over here. And this is also the area where we have space to expand the actual structure. So we're still working on like what it's going to look like, the design and all of that. But we think that by putting it at the end here, we can fit way more cars in a line on our property, which should make it much more comfortable for the customer experience. And it just gets them closer to the annual field, which especially in the summer, they all want to see. And then they can also peek into the tunnel, see all of that color. But this is what the farm looks like right now in Oklahoma in early March. There are some major wins, like in the tunnel. I'm just so excited to see all those ranunculus bloom. There's some hard lessons being learned, obviously, with the tulips, but that's farming, and we're excited to see what this year brings us.
Should I do a pronunciation?
Don't do the Korean.
Jing.
Don't.
Jing.
Stop.
Jing Sita.